Hello everyone! Today we're diving into the fascinating world of ancient Egypt. You might think of Egypt as a vast desert with the mighty Nile River running through it, but did you know that thousands of years ago it was actually a lush green paradise? Around 10,000 BCE, when people in parts of southwestern Asia were just beginning to settle down and farm, North Africa, including Egypt, was a land of abundant lakes and grasslands. It was a perfect place for the early humans to thrive, with plenty of resources to go around. But by around 6000 BCE, things started to change. The once green lands began to dry up, turning into the Sahara Desert we know today. As survival became harder, people moved closer to water sources, like oases and the Nile River Valley. The Nile, stretching thousands of miles from Central Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, became a lifeline for these early communities. The fertile land along its banks, nourished by the river's regular floods, allowed agriculture to flourish. Around 7000 to 6000 BCE, people in the Nile Valley began farming wheat and barley and raising animals like sheep, goats, and cattle, likely learning these skills through contact with the Levant. This period marks the beginnings of what we recognize as Egyptian culture. Two different Neolithic cultures emerged, one in the Nile Delta, where the river meets the Mediterranean, and another further upriver to the south. These early Egyptians lived in simple huts, relied on fishing and farming, created unique pottery, and even practiced burial rituals. Over time, these communities grew into two distinct kingdoms, Lower Egypt in the Delta and Upper Egypt upriver. Around 3150 BCE, a significant moment in history occurred when Upper and Lower Egypt united into a single powerful kingdom. This unification is often credited to a king named Narmer, who some believe is the same as the legendary King Menes. This era, known as the Early Dynasty period, saw the rise of the first dynasties of a unified Egypt. Unlike the city-states of Mesopotamia, which often fought among themselves, Egypt became a stable, centralized state protected by its geography. The deserts surrounding the Nile made it difficult for invaders to penetrate, turning Egypt into an island of civilization in a vast arid sea. During this time, many of the cultural traits we associate with ancient Egypt began to take shape. This includes the role of the pharaoh, who wasn't just a ruler but also a high priest and a living god, believed to be the human incarnation of Horus, the god of justice and truth. The pharaoh's divine presence was thought to maintain order and prosperity in the land, symbolized by the predictable, life-giving floods of the Nile. Speaking of religion, the Egyptians worshipped many gods, each connected to the forces of nature. For example, Re was the sun god, and Isis was the goddess of fertility. The annual flooding of the Nile was deeply tied to their beliefs, explained through myths like that of Osiris, the god of the underworld, who was murdered by his brother Seth, but resurrected by his wife Isis. The Egyptians saw the world as orderly and balanced, a belief that was reflected in their concept of Maat, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic balance. So, as you can see, the Nile wasn't just a river to the ancient Egyptians, it was the very foundation of their civilization, shaping their culture, religion, and way of life. It gave them a sense of harmony and stability, something that was reflected in every aspect of their world. And now let's explore how the Egyptians developed one of their most fascinating innovations, writing. The Egyptians created their own unique writing system, known as hieroglyphics. The term hieroglyphics comes from the Greek words meaning sacred writings, but the Egyptians themselves called it Medu-Necha, which translates to the gods' words. This writing system evolved over time, with its roots tracing back to the period before the early dynastic period, when the first written symbols began to appear. By around 3000 BCE, these symbols had developed into a complex and sophisticated script. Hieroglyphics used a mix of alphabetic signs, syllabic signs, word signs, and even pictures of objects. It wasn't just about writing down sounds, it also captured ideas. This complex system was known only to highly trained scribes, who played a crucial role in recording everything from religious texts to government records. To make writing more practical for everyday use, the Egyptians also developed a simplified version of hieroglyphics called hieratic. This version was used for more routine tasks like record-keeping and issuing receipts in trade. Scribes would inscribe their messages not only on stone walls of temples and tombs, but also on papyrus, a material similar to paper made from the reeds that grew along the Nile. Thanks to Egypt's dry climate, many of these papyrus scrolls have survived for thousands of years, offering us a glimpse into the lives, myths, and beliefs of ancient Egyptians. Now, let's move forward to one of the most iconic aspects of ancient Egyptian civilization, the pyramids. By the 1600s BCE, Egypt had become so powerful and organized that it embarked on an incredible architectural journey, the construction of massive stone pyramids. This period, known as the Old Kingdom, is when Egypt's most famous pyramids were built. The pyramids served as grand tombs for the pharaohs, where their bodies were preserved after death. This was crucial to Egyptian religious beliefs, which held that a person was made up of several spiritual elements, including the Ka, Ba, and Ak. The Ka was like a spiritual double, staying with the body in the tomb and needing to be nourished with offerings. The Ba was another spiritual essence that could leave the tomb by day but returned at night. The Ak was responsible for journeying to the underworld and the afterlife. These beliefs in the afterlife were why mummification and elaborate tombs were so important in Egyptian culture. Before the Grand Pyramids, the Egyptians built simpler tombs called mastabas out of mud brick. But this all changed during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser, just before the start of the Old Kingdom. Djoser's architect, Imhotep, had a revolutionary idea. Instead of a single mastaba, why not build multiple tiers of stone mastabas, one on top of the other? The result was the Step Pyramid of Djoser, a marvel of ancient engineering that marked the beginning of Egypt's pyramid-building era. This step pyramid was soon followed by even more impressive structures. During the reign of Pharaoh Senusret, the first smooth-sided pyramid was built, known as the Red Pyramid because of its reddish limestone. But the most famous of all is the Great Pyramid at Giza, constructed by Senusret's son, Khufu. Standing at an original height of 481 feet, it remains one of the most awe-inspiring monuments in history. Building these pyramids required immense resources and labor. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus claimed that it took 100,000 workers 20 years to build the Great Pyramid, but modern archaeologists suggest the workforce was likely around 20,000. These workers weren't slaves. They were skilled laborers who lived in nearby cities built to house and care for them. As the Old Kingdom progressed, the construction of these vast pyramid complexes also led to an increase in the number of priests and administrators needed to manage them. Over time, this growing bureaucracy, along with the wealth and power of regional governors, started to weaken the central authority of the pharaohs. By around 2200 BCE, this shift in power contributed to what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a time when the once centralized power of Egypt became more fragmented. While earlier scholars viewed this period as one of chaos and decline, modern research suggests a different story. Rather than a total collapse, it was more of a redistribution of power, with regional leaders gaining more control. This shift might have seemed chaotic from the perspective of the central government, but it wasn't necessarily the dark age it was once thought to be. And as the First Intermediate Period drew to a close around 2040 BCE, Egypt began to see the rise of a new era, often referred to as the Middle Kingdom. This resurgence was spearheaded by a series of powerful rulers, starting with Mentuhotep II, who managed to re-establish centralized control over the once fragmented land. This newfound stability paved the way for a period of remarkable growth and achievement, lasting nearly 260 years. One of the most significant figures during this time was Amenemhat, who in 1991 BCE transitioned from being a vizier, an advisor to the royal family, to seizing control and founding a new line of pharaohs that would rule Egypt for the next 2 centuries. Under the leadership of these pharaohs, Egypt began to flourish once again. The country established its first standing army, reignited large-scale building projects reminiscent of earlier eras, and expanded its influence through contact with neighboring regions like the Levant in Kush, which is in modern-day Sudan. A strong centralized power structure held the kingdom together, ensuring its continued success. During this period, the cult of Amon-Re rose to prominence. Amon-Re was a fusion of two deities, Re, the sun god worshipped in the north, and Amon, a sky god revered in the south. Together, they were seen as the king of the gods and the divine father of each reigning pharaoh. Unlike their predecessors, the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom did not focus on building massive pyramids for their tombs. Instead, they dedicated their resources to constructing grand temples for Amon-Re and his wife, Mut, the mother goddess, at Thebes. The ruins of these temples, located at Karnak in southern Egypt, still stand today as a testament to the grandeur of that era. These temples were not just places of worship, they were architectural marvels, with immense halls supported by rows of columns, expansive courtyards, and ceremonial gates. On special festival days, the sacred images of the deities housed within were brought out in ritual processions, highlighting the religious fervor of the time. The Middle Kingdom reached its zenith during the reign of Senusret III in the 1870s and 1860s BCE. Senusret was not just a powerful warrior pharaoh, he was also a capable administrator who significantly expanded Egypt's territorial control. His military campaigns in Kush and the Levant not only bolstered Egypt's defenses, but also increased trade, bringing in valuable resources like gold from Kush and skilled mercenaries. Senusret's reign marked a time of unparalleled centralization. He reduced the power of the regional governors, known as nomarchs, and consolidated authority, ensuring that Egypt remained a powerful unified state. This period of stability and prosperity also fostered a cultural renaissance, with advancements in art, architecture, and literature. However, the deaths of Senusret III and his successor, Amenemhat III, led to a significant turning point. The royal power briefly shifted to an Egyptian woman, Sobekneferu, who ruled as the first female pharaoh since before the Old Kingdom. Although her reign was short and her achievements are not well documented, Sobekneferu was notable for associating herself with the crocodile god Sobek, and she may have even commissioned the construction of the city of Crocodilopolis in his honor. But with her passing, the line of Amenemhat I came to an end. By the time Sobekneferu took the throne, signs of decline were already evident. Over the next century, the central authority of the pharaohs weakened. Increasing numbers of Semitic-speaking peoples from the Levant began settling in the Nile Delta, initially as part of growing trade relations. But by the late 1700s BCE, these groups, known to the Egyptians as the Hyksos, or rulers of foreign lands, had grown powerful enough to assert control over parts of the region. Today, we know them as the Hyksos, a name derived from a Greek corruption of the original Egyptian term. As the Hyksos gained control over the Nile Delta, Egypt entered what historians call the Second Intermediate Period. Much like the First Intermediate Period, this was a time of diminished centralized power. The once mighty Egyptian state was effectively divided into three regions: the Hyksos in the north, the Kushites in the south, and the remnants of the Egyptian nobility in the center, ruling from Thebes. Despite this fragmentation, the different regions maintained relatively peaceful relations for most of the period. But things began to change in the 1550s BCE, when Theban rulers started to push back against the Hyksos. After successfully reclaiming the Nile Delta, the Egyptians turned their attention to Kush, eventually bringing these southern lands under their control as well. These victories set the stage for a new era of Egyptian greatness, ushering in the New Kingdom, the peak of Egypt's power and cultural influence in the ancient world.